Chapter 1 Born into Shadows. I was born into a world that no one else could understand. The white family, the devout, the ones everyone in our compound called blessed, they called me Caleb. And from the day I opened my eyes, I was told my place. An Omega. Gentle, quiet, obedient, safe. At 16, I had lived 16 years inside the same walls, under the same rules, obeying the same rituals. I never questioned them. Not out loud, not where my mother or father could hear. But at night, in the small hours when the torches dimmed and the chanting of the elders faded, I could feel the flicker of something else. The thought, a curiosity that whispered, "This can't be all there is." Being a recessive Omega had its blessings. They told me. My heats weren't strong, barely more than a mild fever. It made me feel different from other Omegas, lucky even in a strange way. While the others trembled and writhed under their instincts, I could endure mine. I could control it. And yet, even with that control, I felt trapped. "Caleb, come." My father's voice cut through my thoughts, smooth and commanding. I rose immediately. My legs carried me across the courtyard, past the stone statues of our ancestors, past the other children kneeling in silence, down the hall lined with carved scripture. The elder's eyes followed me, sharp and expectant. "You will attend the ceremony tonight," Father said, his tone unreadable. "Your dedication must be unquestionable." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Dedication was what we were taught. Obedience was safety. Anything else was dangerous. Even as I obeyed, a seed of doubt had been planted. A seed that whispered whenever I dared to breathe outside their rules. I wandered later to the garden. A small, secret place no one used. The flowers were wild here, untamed, growing in spirals of color that I wasn't allowed to touch. I knelt, letting my fingers hover above a violet bloom. For a moment, it was the only freedom I felt. A small, stolen breath in a life tightly controlled. I thought of what I'd seen in the village once, when we were allowed rare trips beyond the walls. Children laughing, free to run and play. The air smelled different there, fresh, electric, real. But here, in our compound, everything was measured, expected, controlled. Even my emotions felt like chains, tied to rituals and obligations I barely understood. At dinner, my family discussed the upcoming festival. The cult leader would be there. His gaze swept the room like a predator scanning its prey. I felt his eyes on me and turned my attention to my plate, feeling a faint heat rise to my cheeks. Not a heat of desire, not yet, but the smallest flicker that made my body aware of his presence. I excused myself early, retreating to my room. Alone, I let the exhaustion of the day hit me. My heartbeat thudded in my chest, not from excitement, but fear. Fear that one day, the walls around me wouldn't be enough to keep the world out, and that I might have to face it without guidance. I fell asleep staring at the ceiling, the shadows dancing across the beams, wondering what it would feel like to make a choice for myself, to walk somewhere without instruction, to breathe without permission. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that thought was dangerous, but it also felt alive. Chapter 2 Questions in Silence. I started noticing things after that night, not all at once. Not like some sudden revelation where the world cracked open and truth poured in. It was quieter than that. Small moments that didn't quite fit, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong place. It began during morning recitation. We were kneeling in the main hall, rows of us lined up by rank and designation. Alphas in front, betas behind them, omegas last. Always last. My knees pressed into the cold stone floor as we repeated the scripture in unison, our voices echoing against the high ceiling. "Obedience is freedom," we chanted. I had said those words my entire life. But that morning, something inside me hesitated. If obedience was freedom, why did I feel trapped? The thought startled me so much that I almost stumbled over the next line. I lowered my head quickly, hoping no one noticed. Questioning wasn't just discouraged, it was dangerous. Doubt meant weakness. Weakness meant correction. Correction meant pain. After the recitation, Mother walked beside me through the courtyard. Her expression was calm, but her grip on my wrist was tighter than usual. "You seemed distracted," she said softly. "I'm sorry," I answered immediately. The apology came automatically, like breathing. She studied me for a moment. "You must guard your thoughts, Caleb. The world outside is full of corruption. We protect you here." Protect. The word lingered in my mind long after she released me, because protection wasn't supposed to feel like suffocation. Later that afternoon, I was assigned to help prepare supplies in the storage hall. It was one of the few places where elders didn't watch constantly. I worked quietly, stacking cloth bundles and jars, when I heard voices from the adjacent room. "The offering schedule must change," someone said. I froze. The voice belonged to one of the senior elders. "But the scripture," another voice began. "The scripture serves the leader," the elder interrupted sharply. "Not the other way around." My heart skipped. That wasn't what we were taught. Scripture was supposed to be sacred, absolute, untouchable. Yet here they were, speaking about it like it was flexible, adjustable, like it wasn't truth at all. I moved away quickly, pulse racing, afraid they might notice me listening. But the words echoed in my head the rest of the day. The scripture serves the leader, not the other way around. That night, during dinner, Father spoke proudly about devotion and sacrifice, about how our family was chosen, blessed. I nodded along, but something felt off now, like I was watching a performance instead of living reality. When the cult leader entered the dining hall, everyone fell silent instantly. His presence always did that, like a shadow passing over sunlight. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. His gaze lingered on me again. I felt it like a physical touch, crawling across my skin. A faint warmth stirred in my body, my omega instincts reacting automatically to an alpha's presence. But it wasn't desire. It was discomfort, unease, a quiet alarm bell ringing somewhere deep inside me. I lowered my head, hoping he'd look away. He didn't. "Caleb," he said smoothly, "you are growing well." "Yes, sir," I whispered. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder. The contact made my stomach twist. It wasn't inappropriate, not outwardly, but something about it felt wrong. Possessive. Claiming. When he finally walked away, I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That night in my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my hands. For the first time in my life, I let myself think something dangerous. What if this isn't normal? The thought filled me with instant guilt. My chest tightened. My breathing grew shallow. I pressed my palms together, whispering apologies to the air, to the ancestors, to anyone who might be listening. But even as I apologized, the question stayed. And questions, once born, don't die easily. Chapter 3, Forbidden Thoughts. The first time I touched something forbidden, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. It wasn't intentional. At least, not at first. I had been sent to clean the older storage rooms, places rarely used except during seasonal ceremonies. Dust clung to everything in thick layers, the air stale and heavy with the scent of age. Most people hated being assigned there, but I didn't mind. It was quiet. No constant supervision. No watchful eyes measuring my obedience. I was moving crates against the far wall when I noticed a loose stone near the floor. Curiosity flickered. I hesitated. Then, before I could stop myself, I crouched down and pulled it free. Behind it was a small hollow space, and inside, a book. My heart slammed against my ribs. Books weren't forbidden entirely. We had scripture, manuals, approved texts, but this one wasn't like those. The cover was worn, cracked leather without any sacred symbols carved into it, which meant it wasn't approved, which meant I definitely wasn't supposed to touch it. I should have put it back. I knew that. Instead, I opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, messy, hurried, emotional. A journal. I scanned the first few lines, my breath catching. If anyone finds this, please know we were lied to. My pulse roared in my ears. Lied to? I kept reading. The writer described arriving at the compound years ago, believing it was a sanctuary. But slowly, they realized the leader controlled everything: information, movement, relationships. Punishments were disguised as corrections. Loyalty was enforced through fear. My stomach twisted. This couldn't be real. It had to be someone weak. Someone corrupted. That's what I'd always been told about defectors. But the words felt honest. Painfully honest. I flipped pages faster, devouring the entries. Mentions of families being separated for disobedience. Omegas being assigned to certain alphas for spiritual purposes. People disappearing after questioning authority. My hands went cold, because I recognized some of the names, recognized the events. Except, I had been told different explanations. They chose to leave. They were called to a higher purpose. They were purified. But here, in ink that had bled into the paper from tears, the truth sounded very different. Fear crawled up my spine. I snapped the book shut, breathing hard. If anyone caught me with this, I shoved it back into the hollow and replaced the stone, wiping dust across the surface to hide any disturbance. But it was too late. The words were already inside my head. That night, I couldn't focus on anything. During evening prayers, the chants felt hollow. At dinner, Father spoke about unity and trust, and I found myself studying his face, wondering, does he know? Or was he also deceived? The thought made my chest ache, because I loved my family. Even with the strictness, even with the pressure, they were my parents. But what if they were wrong? Later, as I walked through the courtyard alone, I noticed something else I'd never paid attention to before. The guards. There were more of them than necessary, positioned at exits, watching constantly, not protecting us from outsiders, protecting the compound from people leaving. A cold realization settled in my stomach. We're not being protected. We're being contained. My breathing quickened. For years, I'd believed the outside world was dangerous, corrupt, evil. But what if the danger was here? That thought should have terrified me. Instead, beneath the fear, something else stirred. A small, fragile spark. Hope. If this place wasn't the only truth, then maybe there was another life waiting somewhere beyond these walls. A life where I could make choices, where I could breathe without permission. The idea felt impossible. And yet, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Chapter 4, A Spark of Defiance. Once you realize a cage exists, you start noticing the bars everywhere. I couldn't unsee it anymore. The guards at the gates. The way elders watched conversations just a little too closely. The constant reminders that the outside world was dangerous, corrupt, sinful. Every rule suddenly felt less like protection and more like control. And the worst part? I didn't know what to do with that realization. For days, I carried it quietly, like a secret burning in my chest. I still followed orders, still bowed my head, still recited scripture on command. But inside, something had shifted. I wasn't obeying because I believed anymore. I was obeying because I was afraid. The difference mattered. My first act of defiance was so small no one else would have noticed. After evening chores, instead of returning directly to my room, I lingered in the garden. We weren't forbidden from being there, but we were expected to move with purpose. Efficiency, discipline. Standing still without instruction was seen as wasteful. I stood there anyway. The air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of damp soil and flowers. I closed my eyes, letting myself simply exist for a moment without thinking about expectations. Felt good, dangerously good. Tiny thrill ran through me. Nothing happened. No one yelled. No punishment came crashing down, which made something inside me whisper. Maybe I have more freedom than I thought. That whisper was addictive. Over the next week, my rebellions grew slightly bolder. I walked slower when sent on errands. I asked a question during a lesson. Not challenging, just curious. The elder's reaction was immediate, sharp, suspicious. "Why do you ask?" he said. "I just wanted to understand better," I replied quickly, lowering my gaze. He studied me for a long moment before continuing the lesson. But I felt it, the shift, tension. And attention in this place was never good. Still, the spark inside me kept growing. One afternoon, I found myself near the outer fence during supply transport. The gate stood partially open while workers moved crates in and out. Beyond it stretched the dirt road leading toward the distant town. I had seen that road my whole life, but I had never stood this close to it. My heart pounded. Just a few steps. That was all it would take to cross the threshold. I didn't move. Fear rooted my feet to the ground. Leaving meant everything changing. Leaving meant abandoning my family. Leaving meant the unknown. But for the first time, I realized something else too. Staying meant never having a choice. A guard's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. "Caleb, move." I flinched, stepping back immediately. "Yes, sir." I returned to my duties, but the image of that open gate burned into my mind. That night, during dinner, the cult leader entered again. The atmosphere shifted instantly, like oxygen being sucked from the room. He greeted my parents warmly, praising their devotion. Then his gaze landed on me, and lingered, longer than usual. I felt it like heat crawling under my skin. "You've grown quieter," he said casually. My throat tightened. "I'm focusing on my studies, sir." "Good," he replied, smiling faintly. "Focus is important." His hand rested briefly against the back of my neck. My body stiffened before I could stop myself. It was subtle, probably invisible to anyone else. But he noticed. His fingers pressed slightly harder. Not enough to hurt. Enough to remind me that he could. A chill slid down my spine. When he finally withdrew, I forced myself to keep breathing normally. But inside, alarm bells were screaming. He knew something had changed. I didn't know how, but he knew. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling again, my thoughts racing. The spark of defiance was still there, but now it was tangled with fear. Because if he was watching me, then every step toward freedom just became more dangerous. Chapter 5: Tightening Chains. Once someone starts watching you, you feel it everywhere. I couldn't prove the cult leader was paying extra attention to me. No one said it outright. No accusations were made. But the atmosphere around me had shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. Tasks that used to rotate among the younger members suddenly fell to me more often. Errands that required reporting directly to elders. Lessons where I was called on repeatedly, as if they were testing my loyalty. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Paranoia born from guilt. But then my mother started hovering. "You've seemed distant," she said one evening while helping me fold linens. Her voice was gentle, concerned. The leader noticed. "He's worried about you." My stomach dropped. Worried. That wasn't a comforting word coming from him. "I'm fine," I said quickly. She cupped my cheek. "We only want what's best for you, Caleb. Doubt is dangerous. It leads people away from salvation." Guilt stabbed through me instantly, because she believed that. My parents weren't trying to hurt me. They thought they were protecting me. That realization hurt more than any punishment could have. The next day, I was summoned to the administrative hall. Alone. My pulse hammered as I walked through the corridor. The doors were heavier here, the air quieter, like the walls themselves were listening. When I entered the room, he was already there. The cult leader. He smiled warmly, gesturing for me to sit. "Caleb," he said, voice smooth as honey. "You've been under strain." "I'm sorry if I've disappointed you," I murmured automatically. "You haven't," he replied. "But you're growing. And growth can be confusing, especially for an Omega." A flicker of discomfort ran through me. He stood and walked behind my chair. I froze. His hand rested on my shoulder. "Your nature makes you sensitive," he continued. "Vulnerable. That's why guidance is important." His thumb moved slowly, almost absent-mindedly, against my collarbone. My skin prickled. Something was wrong. Every instinct in my body whispered that this wasn't normal. But years of conditioning screamed louder. Obey. Respect. Trust. "I want to help you," he said softly near my ear. "You trust me, don't you?" "Yes, sir," I whispered, throat tight. "Good." His hand slid slightly lower down my back. My breath caught. Not overtly inappropriate. Not something I could clearly object to. But it made my stomach twist with unease. He stepped away a moment later, as if nothing had happened. "You may go," he said. I stood quickly, bowing before leaving the room. My legs felt shaky all the way back to the dormitory. That night, the anxiety finally broke through. I sat on my bed, hands trembling, trying to understand what I was feeling. Fear, confusion, and something else. Violation. Even though nothing explicit had happened. I pressed my palms against my eyes, breathing unevenly. If this place was safe, why did I feel unsafe? The question wouldn't leave me alone. Over the next few days, the pressure increased. My father reminded me constantly about loyalty. My mother prayed over me longer than usual. Elders watched me with sharper eyes. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. And the leader, he kept finding excuses to be near me. Brief touches, lingering looks, private conversations framed as guidance. Each interaction left me more unsettled. One evening, after another tense dinner, I retreated to the garden, the only place that still felt like mine. I sank onto the ground, hugging my knees to my chest. Tears burned behind my eyes. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I didn't want to think the person everyone trusted could hurt me. But my instincts wouldn't stay quiet anymore. For the first time in my life, I admitted something terrifying to myself. I'm not safe here. And once that truth formed, there was no going back. Chapter 6. Shadows of Danger. Nothing happened. For months, nothing happened. At least nothing obvious. No punishments. No confrontations. No dramatic accusations of disobedience. Life in the compound continued the way it always had. Structured, predictable, suffocating. But inside me, everything was changing. After that meeting with the leader, I became more careful. More observant. I avoided being alone in places where I might run into him. I kept conversations short, respectful, neutral, outwardly obedient. Inwardly, though, I was rebelling in small, quiet ways. I took longer routes between buildings just to see different corners of the compound. I lingered in the garden whenever I could. I stopped repeating scripture in my head before sleep. Each tiny act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't act on it. The leader still watched me sometimes, his gaze heavy and assessing, but he never crossed boundaries again. Not openly. Not in ways I could point to. Eventually, the constant tension dulled into something like uneasy normalcy, which almost made me wonder if I had imagined the threat. Almost. Winter came and went. The air warmed again. Another cycle of rituals passed. And then I turned 17. Birthdays weren't celebrated the way the outside world did, but milestones were acknowledged. My parents prayed over me that morning, thanking the ancestors for my continued devotion and growth. I stood quietly while they spoke, feeling strangely detached. 17. 1 year closer to adulthood. 1 year closer to what? That evening, an elder approached me after supper. "The leader would like to see you," he said. My stomach tightened instantly. For a brief moment I considered refusing. The thought shocked me. Refusal wasn't an option here. So I nodded. "Yes, sir." The administrative hall felt colder than usual as I walked through it. My heartbeat echoed in my ears with every step. When I entered the room, he was alone, smiling. "Caleb," he said warmly, "you've matured well." "Thank you, sir." He gestured toward a chair near his desk. "Sit. I wanted to offer guidance as you transition into greater responsibility." I obeyed, trying to ignore the tension coiling in my chest. At first, the conversation seemed normal. Questions about my duties, my studies, my commitment. Then he moved closer. Too close. His hand brushed my shoulder. I stiffened. "Relax," he murmured. "You're safe with me." Every instinct in my body screamed the opposite. His fingers slid down my arm, slow and deliberate. Panic surged. "Sir." My voice came out thin. "You're special, Caleb," he said softly. "You've always been special. Your nature, your obedience. It deserves reward." His hand reached my waist. My mind went blank. For a split second, years of conditioning tried to force compliance. Obey. Submit. Trust. But something stronger broke through. Fear. Real, visceral fear. I pushed back from the chair abruptly, stumbling to my feet. I need to go, I stammered. His expression changed. The warmth vanished. What are you afraid of? He asked quietly. The question felt like a trap. I didn't answer. I turned toward the door. His hand caught my wrist. Not violently, but firmly enough to stop me. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might faint. Caleb, he said, voice low, you misunderstand. This is part of your devotion. Devotion. The word snapped something inside me. No, I whispered. It was the first time I had ever said that to him. Shock flickered across his face. I yanked my wrist free and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the dormitory corridor. Breath ragged, vision blurred with tears. My entire body was shaking. Nothing had happened. Not completely, but it had almost happened. And the realization hit me like a physical blow. If I stayed here, next time I might not escape. That night, curled under my blanket, I stared into the darkness, trembling. Fear was still there, but now it was fused with something new. Resolve. I had to leave, no matter what it cost. Chapter 7. Planning the flight. Once the decision formed, it refused to leave. I had to escape. There was no dramatic moment where courage suddenly replaced fear. I was still terrified, of getting caught, of being dragged back, of what would happen to my family if I left. But beneath the fear was something steady and unyielding. If I stayed, I wouldn't be safe. That truth became my anchor. For the first few weeks after the incident, I acted exactly the same as before. Obedient, quiet, predictable. I avoided the leader as much as possible without making it obvious. If he noticed, he didn't show it. That almost made things worse. Like waiting for a storm you couldn't see yet. Meanwhile, I started observing everything. Guard rotations, meal schedules, which gates were used for deliveries, who stayed up late, who slept early. I had never paid attention to these details before. Now they felt like pieces of a puzzle that might determine whether I lived freely or spent the rest of my life trapped. The outer supply gate quickly became my focus. It wasn't open often, but when it was, activity increased. Workers moving crates, guards distracted, elders busy supervising. Chaos created opportunity. I just needed timing. And supplies. That part was harder. We didn't have money. The cult handled everything internally. But sometimes members received small allowances for errands in the nearby town. Over several weeks, I managed to save tiny amounts. Coins slipped into the lining of my mattress. Every coin felt like stolen hope. I also gathered essentials slowly. An extra shirt, a small water flask, dried food wrapped in cloth. Nothing noticeable on its own. Together, they might keep me alive long enough to figure out the rest. The hardest part wasn't the planning. It was the guilt. Every time my mother smiled at me, warmth in her eyes, my chest tightened painfully. Every time my father spoke proudly about my devotion, I felt like I was betraying him. They weren't bad people. They were trapped too. But I couldn't save them. Not yet. That realization hurt more than anything else. One evening, my mother sat beside me while I sorted linens. "You seem happier lately," she said gently. I froze. Happier? Was I? Maybe determination looked like happiness from the outside. "I'm doing my best," I replied carefully. She brushed my hair back from my forehead, the way she used to when I was younger. "We're proud of you, Caleb." The word stabbed straight through my heart. For a moment, doubt surged. Maybe I could endure. Maybe leaving wasn't necessary. Maybe. Then I remembered his hand on my wrist. The quiet threat in his voice. The certainty that next time I might not get away. Resolve returned instantly. That night, I finalized my plan. During the next supply delivery, 3 days away, I would slip out with the workers when the gate opened. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Just go. The days leading up to it felt unreal. Every sound seemed louder. Every glance from an elder felt suspicious. My heartbeat rarely slowed. I barely slept. The night before the planned escape, I packed my small bundle, and hid it behind the garden wall where I could retrieve it quickly. Standing there under the moonlight, I looked around the compound. This place had been my entire world for 17 years. Every memory, every relationship, every belief, and I was about to leave it behind. Fear pressed against my ribs, but alongside it was something else. Hope, fragile, terrifying, beautiful. I took a slow breath. Tomorrow, I whispered to myself, tomorrow, everything would change. Chapter 8. Breaking Point. The morning of my escape arrived too quickly. I woke before dawn, heart already racing, as if my body knew what the day would bring. For a few seconds, I lay still in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet breathing of the others in the dormitory. This was the last time I would wake up here. The thought felt surreal. I dressed carefully, forcing my hands to stay steady. Every movement had to look normal, routine, predictable. Inside, though, my pulse thundered like a drum. After morning recitation, I followed the schedule exactly as planned: chores, breakfast, supply inventory. No one stopped me. No suspicious looks. No alarms. It almost felt too easy, which made me more nervous. By mid-morning, the delivery carts began arriving near the outer gate. Workers moved back and forth carrying crates while elders supervised inventory lists. Guards stood nearby, but their attention shifted constantly with the activity. Chaos. Opportunity. I slipped away toward the garden wall, retrieving the small bundle I had hidden the night before. My fingers tightened around the cloth. This was it. No turning back. I joined a group of workers carrying empty crates toward the gate, keeping my head down. My breathing felt shallow, controlled only by sheer will. Step by step. Closer. The open gate loomed ahead, sunlight spilling across the threshold like an invitation. Freedom was only a few meters away. Then, Caleb. My blood turned to ice. I froze. Slowly I turned. My father stood behind me, my mother beside him, and two elders. Their expressions weren't angry. They were devastated. "How could you?" my mother whispered, tears already in her eyes. My chest cracked open. My voice failed. My father stepped forward, gripping my shoulder. "You're confused," he said firmly. "We can fix this. Come back inside." Fix. The word made panic surge. "No," I said weakly. His grip tightened. "Don't do this. The outside world will destroy you. We're protecting you." Protecting. The same word again. But now I understood what it really meant. "I'm not safe here," I whispered. The elders exchanged glances. One of them moved toward the gate, quietly signaling the guards. Panic exploded through me. If they closed the gate, if they took me back, everything would be over. My father tried to pull me toward the compound. Instinct took over. I twisted free and ran. Shouts erupted behind me. "Stop him!" Hands grabbed at my clothes. Someone caught my sleeve, fabric tearing as I yanked away. My lungs burned as I sprinted toward the open road, adrenaline drowning out everything except the desperate need to keep moving. Footsteps thundered behind me. I didn't look back. If I looked back, I might stop. If I stopped, I'd lose my chance forever. The ground beneath my feet shifted from packed dirt to loose gravel as I crossed the threshold beyond the gate. Beyond the compound. Beyond everything I had ever known. "Caleb!" my mother screamed behind me. The sound nearly broke me. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept running. I didn't stop until the shouts faded. Until the walls disappeared behind trees. Until my legs finally gave out and I collapsed beside the road, gasping for air. Silence surrounded me. No chance. No orders. No watchful eyes. Just wind moving through grass. I curled onto my side, trembling violently. I had done it. I had left. Relief surged through me so suddenly it hurt. But alongside it came something else. Fear. I had no home. No plan beyond this moment. No idea what came next. For 17 years, my life had been controlled. Now it was entirely mine. The realization was overwhelming, terrifying, and strangely freeing. For the first time in my life, the future was unknown. And that meant anything was possible. Chapter 9. First breath of freedom. Freedom tasted like dust and wind. I had crossed the compound's gates, but the world beyond wasn't kind. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain. My bundle was small, my stomach rumbling, and my limbs ached from the sprint that had carried me away from everything I'd known. For the first time in my life, I was alone, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The first weeks were survival in its rawest form. I slept under bridges, in alleys, or wherever a patch of shadows offered some cover. I begged when I had to, scavenged when I could, and avoided anyone who looked like they might notice me. My skin had never known dirt like this. My hands never hardened to work outside the compound. Every sound, the shout of a drunk on the street, the screech of tires, the bark of a stray dog, made me flinch. I tried to find work. Small jobs, carrying crates at markets, washing dishes in cafes, sweeping streets. But every day ended with bruised hands, empty pockets, and exhaustion that seeped into my bones. I wasn't used to thinking for myself, to negotiating, to lying for survival. And when I did manage to scrape together a few coins, it never felt like enough. Some nights, I returned to my bundle and wept quietly. Not just for what I had left behind, though my parents' faces haunted me constantly, but for the years I had wasted trapped. For the innocence that had been stolen, for the childhood stolen, for the freedom I'd only just found. I didn't know if I could ever feel safe again. I learned shelters were only temporary reprieves. I could sleep inside, eat a small meal, and wash. But I had no privacy, no real comfort. I learned to hold my breath when other men slept near me, to fold myself small, to disappear without being noticed. I wasn't used to being invisible, but it was safer this way. Weeks turned into months. I grew thinner. My hair fell into my eyes, and my skin grew pale. I learned which streets were safe during the day, which neighborhoods were better avoided. And yet, amid the struggle, I felt alive in a way I never had in the compound. Every decision was mine. Every choice mattered. It was during one of these days, near the end of my first year outside, that I found the café. Small, warm, with the smell of bread and coffee that reminded me faintly of home, though in a way that didn't carry the sting of the cult. I lingered at the entrance, hesitant. People talked and laughed inside, unguarded, alive in ways I had almost forgotten existed. Matt saw me first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with calm eyes that seemed to notice the world differently. He approached gently, asking if I needed help, offering a cup of water when I hesitated. The gesture was small, but it meant everything. For the first time since leaving, I didn't feel the constant weight of being watched, controlled, or hunted. I returned to that cafe often, slowly, cautiously. Matt didn't pry, didn't push. He noticed the fatigue in my posture, the unease in my gaze, and he offered kindness instead of questions. For months, I came in mostly to sit quietly, drinking warm liquids, letting the noise of normal life surround me. Each visit chipped away at the edge of fear. Took time. Weeks became months. I began to trust him enough to talk about small things. Where I had slept last night, where I had scavenged food, how I had learned to hide and survive. Matt listened without judgment, offering practical advice, small smiles, and sometimes a sandwich or extra water. A year passed like this, slowly, unevenly, but steadily. I was still cautious, still haunted by the past, still struggling with the simplest of tasks. Making a plan, earning money, surviving another night. But Matt's presence became a steadying point. Not a cure, not a safety net, but a tether to a world I could begin to believe in piece by piece. Sitting in the cafe one afternoon, watching sunlight spill across the worn-wood tables, I realized something strange. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was existing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, I was beginning to live. And perhaps I thought this was the first step toward something even more. Chapter 10. The Kind Alpha. The first time I really noticed Caleb, he was sitting at the corner table of the cafe, hunched over a cup of lukewarm tea, eyes scanning the room as if he expected trouble to burst through the door at any moment. Something about him made me stop mid-task behind the counter. A tension in his shoulders, a subtle restlessness in his fingers. He looked exhausted. I'd seen people like him before. Kids who had grown up fast, learned to survive too early, learned that trust was a dangerous luxury. But Caleb carried it differently. There was a fragility in him, yes, but also a quiet resilience, a tiny spark that refused to be snuffed out. "Hey," I said gently, approaching him with a steaming mug in hand. "Can I get you something warmer? Coffee, maybe?" He glanced up quickly, eyes wary, then nodded. "Coffee, black, please." I smiled, small, careful, coming right up. As I poured the coffee, I found myself watching him out of the corner of my eye. There was more to this boy than the hunched shoulders and wary eyes. Something about the way he carried himself, alert, cautious yet oddly graceful, made me want to protect him. And maybe that was the part that worried me most. I wasn't used to feeling protective toward strangers. After he drank, he lingered, fidgeting with the edge of the cup. I decided to speak. "You come here often," I said casually, leaning on the counter. "Do you have work? Or are you just surviving day by day?" Caleb's gaze dropped. He hesitated before answering. "Mostly surviving," he muttered. Something clicked inside me. That hesitation, the shame in his voice, the way he tried to minimize himself. It was the same look in the eyes of people who had nowhere safe to go. I couldn't let him keep living like that, not if I could help. "What if you didn't have to survive anymore?" I asked carefully. "What if you could have a place to stay? Somewhere safe?" His eyes shot up, incredulous. I don't understand." "I mean here," I said, motioning toward the café. "There's a storage room in the back I could set up for you. No one would bother you there. And I could put you on the schedule, help you earn your keep while learning the ropes. You'd have a steady meal, a roof over your head." He blinked, like I just handed him something impossible. "Really?" I nodded. "Really. And—" I hesitated, then added, "I also know a gym nearby. It's got showers, hot water, everything. You could take care of yourself there. A little privacy, you know? Especially if, well, you're an Omega. Some precautions are important." He froze, then looked down, cheeks coloring faintly. The subtle shift in his pheromones, the tension in the air, the faint warm trace only another alpha could notice, made me instinctively step closer. But I forced myself to keep space, reminding myself this wasn't about me. This was about helping him. I don't want to cause trouble," he said softly, voice small. "I'm not used to this." "You won't," I assured him. "I'm not asking anything complicated. Just come in, do your work, learn. You set the pace. I'll make sure no one pushes you. And if anything feels off, you tell me, and we fix it. Okay?" Slowly he nodded, still wary, still uncertain. But the tension in his shoulders eased a little. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the first taste of safety he'd had in years. "All right?" he whispered, barely audible. "Thank you." For a moment, I just watched him, noticing the subtle lines of exhaustion on his face, the guarded yet tentative way he allowed himself to breathe a little easier. "Start tomorrow," I said finally. "We'll get you settled in. No pressure, okay?" He nodded again, more firmly this time. A flicker of relief passed through his eyes, and I realized something important. Caleb had been surviving alone for so long that even kindness felt strange to him. But it was worth it. He deserved it. And for the first time in months, I felt something more than curiosity or protectiveness. I felt the slow pull of something deeper, attachment, concern, maybe even the beginnings of affection. But I didn't rush it. Not now. Not with him still so fragile. I just smiled. "Tomorrow, then." Caleb returned to his corner, but his movements were lighter. Even the faintest hint of a smile touched his lips. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Chapter 11, Warmth in Shadows. The first night in the storage room, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the space, it was the realization that I finally had one. A small room at the back of a café, warm, safe, my own for the first time since leaving the cult. I sat on the cot, my bundle of meager belongings tucked beside me, and stared at the bare walls. I had expected relief to come instantly. Freedom was supposed to feel like wings unfurling, like a burst of air that filled your lungs. Instead, it felt strange, unsettling. I wasn't used to being safe. I wasn't used to being unmonitored. The first few days were the hardest. I kept double-checking doors, counting my coins, making sure no one knew I had come and gone. Every step outside the storage room felt like stepping into the unknown. And yet Matt was there, constant, patient, gentle. He didn't ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. He didn't hover. He simply existed around me in ways that felt protective but not suffocating. "Coffee's up," he called from the cafe one morning. "And don't worry, I didn't forget the pastries you like." I hesitated, then stepped out. The warmth hit me first. Warmth of sunlight through the windows, of the cafe bustling with life, of the smell of bread baking. And then, slowly, the warmth of Matt's presence, calm and steady, as if nothing could touch me while he was near. I nodded, muttered a quiet thanks, and took my usual corner seat. My hands fidgeted with the cup, heat radiating through me. Not the kind of heat from Omega instincts, but something deeper, warmer. A safety I hadn't known existed. Days turned into weeks. I settled into routines. Cleaning, stocking shelves, serving customers. I learned the register, carried trays, swept floors. Each task small, repetitive, grounding. I could focus on work instead of constantly thinking about danger, about what might happen if someone discovered me, about whether I could ever trust anyone again. And slowly, I began to open up. First, it was small details. "I'm hungry." I skipped breakfast, I'd admit, and Matt would slide a sandwich across. "Don't worry, I've got you." Then, routines. "I don't like mornings," I'd grumble softly, and he'd smile knowingly. Eventually, tiny stories. "I used to help my mother with the garden," I said once, surprising myself. Matt listened, genuinely interested, nodding and asking gentle questions. He didn't press. He didn't pry. Those conversations became my lifeline. I hadn't realized how starved I was for normalcy, for connection, for someone who treated me like a person, not an Omega to control, not a child to shape, not property to claim. But even with trust growing, I felt tension. A flutter of something inside whenever he stood too close. A nervous awareness of his gaze. The faint warmth of my own pheromones reacting in ways I wasn't used to controlling. Every interaction carried a weight I wasn't sure I wanted. I reminded myself constantly, I wasn't ready for this. Not for attachment. Not for affection. Not for anything beyond this small safety net. Yet the paradox of it lingered. I wanted it. I wanted him there, patient and warm. I wanted to tell him the things I couldn't say anywhere else. I wanted to feel the safety of being wanted, even if only as a friend for now. And maybe, just maybe, I was beginning to hope. Hope that life could feel like this, slow, careful, but alive. Hope that someone could see me, really see me, and not want to hurt me. Hope that I could learn to trust again. Somewhere in the shadows of this small cafe, surrounded by the warmth of fresh bread and quiet conversation, I felt the first flicker of something I had never dared to imagine. That life outside the cult could be more than survival. Could be belonging. Chapter 12, Crossing Hearts. Weeks passed, and the cafe became my world. A small, steady bubble of warmth and routine I hadn't realized I craved. Each morning I woke, knowing there would be work, the smell of fresh bread, the soft murmur of conversation, and Matt's calm presence. It was safe. It was simple. It was mine. But safety came with its own complications. Matt noticed the little things. My hesitant movements, the way I avoided his gaze sometimes, the subtle stiffening whenever he came too close. He never mocked me, never pushed, but he didn't ignore them either. His awareness was constant, and it made my chest tighten in ways I wasn't used to. One afternoon, he asked me to help restock the storage room shelves. As we lifted crates side by side, our hands brushed. I froze, heart hammering. I pulled away slightly, and he just gave me a soft, knowing smile. "You're okay," he said quietly. "I won't push you." The words shouldn't have affected me, But they did. They warmed me like sunlight after a long winter. A spark, small and dangerous, stirred in my chest. A spark that whispered of attraction, of longing, of trust. And I had no idea how to handle it. Over the next few days, these small gestures repeated. Matt would hand me a warm towel after I cleaned the floors, linger in the doorway with a smile when I paused to catch my breath, or slide an extra coffee across the counter with a glance that seemed charged. I caught myself staring at him sometimes, noticing details I hadn't before. The slight curve of his lips when he smiled, the easy confidence in the way he moved, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. My body reacted in ways I hadn't expected. My omega instincts flaring in quiet, manageable ways, but my mind resisted, warning me not to fall into trust too easily. One quiet evening, after closing, we lingered in the café while the dishes cooled. The room smelled of coffee and warm bread, shadows stretching across the tables. "You're different from anyone I've met," Matt said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. His voice was gentle, not probing, not accusing, just observing. I swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. I'm not sure what you mean." He shrugged, smiling faintly. "You're careful, guarded, but there's something else too. Something strong. You've survived more than anyone should have to, and you keep going anyway. That's rare." I looked down, heat rising to my cheeks. Compliments weren't something I was used to, and especially not in a tone that felt sincere without strings attached. I started, then faltered. Words caught in my throat. I wanted to tell him everything, but the memories still weighed too heavy. The thought of opening up entirely felt impossible. Matt stepped a little closer, just enough that I noticed the subtle warmth of his presence. "I like having you here, Caleb," he said softly. "Not just working, not just surviving. You matter." My chest tightened. That single sentence carried more than kindness. It carried an unspoken promise. A tether to safety, warmth, and maybe something more. I wanted to reach for it. I wanted to believe it. But fear, old and insistent, held me back. Trusting someone so fully was still terrifying. Thank you," I murmured. My voice was low, but steady. I like being here too." Matt's smile deepened, but he didn't say more. He didn't push, just gave me space, letting the words hang between us. Later, after I left for the night, I walked the quiet streets to my storage room, mind racing. My heart felt strange, alive, conflicted, drawn to him, yes, but wary. For the first time, I realized that attraction wasn't something I could control. It wasn't about obedience or survival. It was something entirely different, something I wasn't used to, but desperately wanted to understand. And maybe, I thought as I lay down that night, curled under the thin blanket of my small room, this could be the beginning of something real, something gentle, something ours. Chapter 13, Trust and Boundaries. Even with Matt's kindness and the quiet safety of the cafe, I couldn't completely relax. Part of me wanted to stay close, to linger near him, to let myself feel the warmth and the care I'd been starved of for so long. Another part of me pulled back, wary of trusting too quickly, afraid of letting someone see just how fragile I still felt. To cope, I clung to routines that reminded me of independence. I continued using the nearby gym mat had helped set me up with. The warm showers there, the privacy, the controlled exertion of exercise. It grounded me in a world where I could feel normal, strong, and self-sufficient. Some mornings, I arrived early before the cafe opened. The steam from the showers curled around me, the water washing away the tension I carried in my body. I let myself feel my own warmth without embarrassment, inhaling the scent of soap and sweat that reminded me I was still human, still capable of care and care for myself. Other days, I spent time with light workouts, push-ups, stretches, jogging on the treadmill. It wasn't about building muscle or impressing anyone. It was about proving to myself that I could survive outside the compound, that I could exist in a world where I made decisions for myself, controlled my body, and protected my own safety. Afterward, I'd wrap myself in a towel and walk the few blocks back to the cafe, feeling cleaner, lighter. Matt would often glance up from the counter, a small smile flickering in recognition. Sometimes he'd say nothing, just nod in that quiet, knowing way he had, and I'd feel the subtle comfort of being seen, but not pressured. The boundaries were mine to maintain. I appreciated that. I appreciated him. One afternoon, as I carried a tray of drinks to a table, Matt caught my wrist gently. My pulse jumped, and I froze. He didn't linger, just brushed a reassuring hand along my sleeve and whispered, "You're doing well today." It was the smallest of touches, yet it carried weight. I realized I wanted more. I wanted to allow myself to lean on him, but fear made me recoil. My mind raced with reminders of the cult, of how quickly trust could be used against me, of how dangerous closeness had been. So I stayed careful. I smiled when he smiled. I accepted his help, but I never let myself linger. I kept the walls I'd built around my heart strong. Still, there were moments when I let them slip. A glance held too long. A soft laugh at something he said. Standing a little closer than necessary when I returned the trays. Tiny signals I didn't fully understand, and probably neither did he. One evening, after closing, I changed into my workout clothes in the cafe's storage room, feeling the normalcy of moving through the space. Matt's presence lingered as he wiped down tables, his gaze kind, unhurried. "You don't have to keep up with everything at once," he said casually, noticing my tense posture as I tied my sneakers. "Take your time. Your space, your rules." I nodded, words caught in my throat. There was comfort in knowing he respected me. My boundaries, my pace, my fragility. And there was something else, desire. A quiet, cautious stir of longing I wasn't ready to act on but could no longer ignore. That night, after a short run and a long, hot shower, I sat on the edge of the treadmill, breathing deeply, feeling the warmth of my body and the lingering thought of Matt nearby. I realized that trust wasn't a sudden leap. It was steps, tiny, careful steps, and right now I was taking them in my own time. It was enough. For now. Chapter 14. Shared Moments. It was a quiet evening when Matt suggested we close the cafe a little earlier. "Nothing too exciting," he said with a shrug. "Just thought we could grab a coffee upstairs and relax a bit. No rush, no customers." I hesitated. Socializing outside of work routines was still unfamiliar territory. I wasn't used to unstructured time, and the thought of being alone with someone, especially someone I felt drawn to, made my chest tighten. But there was something in his calm expression, in the way his presence seemed to fill the room without pressure, that made me nod. "Okay," I said softly. Upstairs, in a small lounge area he had set up for staff breaks, the lights were dim, warm, and comforting. The smell of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with faint traces of baked bread. I settled into a chair, hands wrapped around my cup, noticing the subtle difference between this space and the bustling cafe below. Here, there was no performance, no work, no expectations, just presence. Matt sat across from me, arms resting casually on the table. "You've adapted really well," he said, his tone easy but sincere. "I see you getting more comfortable, taking small risks, finding your own routines." I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't thought anyone noticed. "I try," I murmured. He smiled. "More than you know. And it's okay to take your time. There's no rush." We fell into a gentle rhythm of conversation. Small topics at first. The weather, the cafe, mundane observations about the neighborhood. But slowly, the distance between us shrank. I found myself talking more, just a little, about my past. Not the cult in detail, not the darkest memories, but glimpses. The routines, the isolation, the constant vigilance I'd lived with for years. He listened, really listened. No judgment, no interruptions. Just a steady presence that somehow made the weight in my chest feel lighter. At one point, I hesitated, twisting the edge of my sleeve nervously. "It's strange," I admitted. "I'm not used to someone noticing me, not just the work or what I can do, but me." Matt leaned forward slightly, his gaze warm and unwavering. "You deserve to be noticed," he said softly. "Not for what you can do or what you survived, but for who you are. And I want you to feel safe enough to be yourself around me." My breath caught. The words carried an intimacy I wasn't prepared for. My body reacted instinctively, warmth rising to my skin, a flutter I hadn't experienced in years. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay grounded. Trust didn't come easily. Not now. Not fully. Yet, despite the caution, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Belonging. The sense that someone cared for me in a way that wasn't about survival, obedience, or fear. We continued talking until the cafe below was empty and dark. Time passed differently upstairs. Slower, softer, warmer. I realized I had shared more than I had intended, and he had accepted it without judgment. That simple acknowledgement, that willingness to see me, was a balm I didn't know I needed. When it was finally time to leave, Matt walked me to the storage room. A subtle tension lingered in the air, unspoken, but comforting. "Take your time," he said quietly as I reached the door. "I'll be here, always." I nodded, feeling the heat in my chest and the flutter in my stomach. There was trust in his words, but there was also something more, something I wasn't ready to name yet. Desire, attachment, hope, all tangled together in a way that scared me and excited me at the same time. I entered the room, closed the door, and leaned against it, exhaling slowly. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could let someone in without fear consuming me. The spark between us had grown into a quiet ember, and I knew the next step, whatever it was, wouldn't be easy. But for now it was enough to just feel it. Chapter 15. Slowly, together. The cafe was quiet that evening, soft amber light spilling across the tables. Most of the customers had left hours ago, leaving only the hum of the fridge and the occasional clink of a cup on a saucer. For once, the world felt like it had slowed down just for us. Matt leaned against the counter, watching me carefully. I could feel his eyes, steady and patient, tracing the lines of my shoulders, the curve of my back, the slight tension I hadn't even realized I carried. I wanted to tell him to stop noticing me, but I couldn't. Felt too important, too human to resist. "You've been doing great these past weeks," he said softly, crossing the small distance between us. "Really, I can see you." Relaxing a little. I swallowed, trying to appear casual. "I'm managing," I said, voice low. He smiled, and there it was again, the warmth that made the flutter start in my chest. He stepped closer. I could feel it in the air. The subtle shift, the heat of his presence, the scent that triggered instincts I wasn't used to managing. "May I?" He hesitated, then leaned closer. "Try something?" My pulse accelerated. My omega instinct screamed caution, but my heart wanted to believe. "Okay," I whispered, barely audible. He moved slowly, giving me space to step back if I needed. But I didn't. I wanted this, or I thought I did. His eyes searched mine for consent, reassurance, and when I nodded slightly, he leaned forward. His lips brushed mine softly, tentatively. Immediately, a visceral reaction surged through me. A wave of fear, panic, and alarm. My body stiffened. Couldn't breathe. My skin flushed. My muscles tensed uncontrollably. The scent of my pheromones rose, screaming distress into the room, into the air around us. Matt froze, eyes wide, caught mid-motion. He must have smelled it, felt it. I could see the concern flash across his face. I can't," I stammered, pulling back instinctively. My hands shook. My chest heaved. My mind screamed at me to run, to get away, to survive. The trauma from the cult, the fear of being overpowered, the memories of past violation. They all collided at once. Matt didn't move toward me. He didn't push. He simply held his hands up, letting me recoil, letting me breathe. "Caleb, it's okay," he said softly. "You're safe. I'm not going to hurt you." Tears blurred my vision. I can't," I whispered again. My omega instincts pulsed violently. I felt exposed, vulnerable, my body betraying me in the most visible way possible. The panic was uncontrollable, physical. My pheromones screamed warning into the air, and my own body felt like it was on fire. Matt stepped back, giving me space without leaving. His presence remained steady, patient. "I know," he said almost reverently. "You don't have to. Not now. Not ever. We move at your pace." I sank to the floor, wrapping my arms around my knees, trembling. The intensity of my reaction terrified me, but his calm, unwavering patience grounded me. He didn't force anything. He didn't judge. He simply stayed. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. Eventually, my breath evened, the panic subsided slightly, and I lifted my head to see Matt still standing there, offering nothing but safety. I want to try," I whispered finally, voice raw. "But not yet. I need more time." He nodded, a small, understanding smile tugging at his lips. "Of course. Slowly. Always slowly." For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel hope instead of fear. I realized that attraction and desire didn't have to be overwhelming. They didn't have to be dangerous. With Matt, I could take my time, rebuild trust, and let my instincts learn safety again. And maybe, eventually, I could believe in love. Epilogue. A year in light. A year had passed since that first evening in the cafe when Matt had offered me a job and a place to stay. The world outside the cult had changed me in ways I hadn't imagined. I was no longer the cautious, withdrawn 17-year-old who had stumbled through city streets, trembling and exhausted. I was still careful, still aware of the scars, both visible and hidden, but I had learned that trust could exist without danger, that safety could coexist with intimacy. The cafe had become more than a workplace. It had become a home in ways I hadn't thought possible. I moved through the space with confidence now, greeting customers, restocking shelves, carrying trays with steady hands. I had learned to laugh again, softly at first, then more freely, and it often carried through the cafe in warm bursts that Matt always noticed. Matt, he was still the same calm, patient presence, but something had changed between us. The subtle warmth and attention that had drawn me in had grown into something mutual. Our slow, careful flirtation had blossomed into a quiet intimacy that didn't demand anything I wasn't ready to give. Our small gestures, a lingering glance, a shared coffee break, a hand brushing against mine, had accumulated into trust. And now, after a year, we could finally acknowledge what had been there all along. One evening, as the cafe closed and the last customers trickled out, Matt leaned against the counter, looking at me with a soft, steady gaze. I felt the familiar stir of nervous anticipation, tempered now with confidence. I didn't need to run. I didn't need to hide. I had built a space where I could exist fully. "You've grown so much," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you, Caleb, of everything you've done and everything you are." I smiled, a real unguarded smile, the kind that came from deep within. "I couldn't have done it without you," I admitted. "Without this. Without your patience." He moved closer, just enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him without triggering that old panic I used to feel. "I've waited a long time for this," he said softly. "For us to be here together. When you're ready." I nodded. My chest felt light, but my heart swelled with emotion I had spent years suppressing. Hope, trust, affection. "I'm ready," I whispered. Matt smiled, careful and gentle, leaning forward to brush his lips against mine. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't demanding. It was slow, deliberate, a kiss built on trust and safety, the kind I had never known before. My body responded naturally, without fear. My pheromones didn't scream distress. They mingled with his in a quiet, intimate harmony. Pulling back slightly, he rested his forehead against mine. "We'll take it slow," he said. "Always at your pace." I nodded, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with instinct and everything to do with love. For the first time, I didn't have to be afraid. I could let someone see me fully, flaws and all. I could exist in a relationship that honored my boundaries, my history, and my healing. Later, we sat together in the quiet cafe, hands intertwined, sharing a coffee. Words weren't necessary. Presence was enough. A year ago, I would have trembled at the thought of this moment. Now, it felt inevitable, natural, and right. I had survived the cult. I had survived the streets. I had survived fear and trauma. And now I was thriving, not just surviving. The future was still unknown. It always would be. But for the first time, I felt equipped to face it with someone by my side, someone I trusted completely, someone who saw me, wanted me, and would continue walking slowly with me. And that was enough.